we're good to go. So what we're doing is going to the second theme, because in my estimation, the two dominant themes in modern political thought at the current conjuncture are violence and technology. So we're going to the second one, and because I assume most of us have a pretty positive view of technology, I mean, certainly I probably do. What you're going to get are critiques of technology, starting with Heidegger and then Marcuse, and which is very similar in a way to Heidegger's critique, only just think Heidegger with Marxist content, because Marcuse was Heidegger's student, and then Virilio. And so what they're doing is basically concentrating on the problems that technology has brought. So Martin Heidegger, first of all, Heidegger is somewhat of a contentious theorist, thinker, philosopher to interact with because of his affiliation with the Nazi Party. So he was a member of the Nazi Party from 33, he was a member of the Nazi Party from 33 all the way through. But he was an active member from 33 to 34. And when he resigned his rectorship at Freiburg, which he took over from Husserl, who was his teacher, but when he resigned that, he wasn't active. So in terms of the tribunal, he was considered, this is not a justification for Heidegger, I'm just giving some background. He was considered, what was it called? He was considered a friendly, it was called friendly something, which means you were friendly to Nazism, but you weren't implementing the policies. So what I do with Heidegger, I refused to read Heidegger for the longest time, probably up until, I don't know, up until like 87 or so, because of this. And then I started with his later works, his works on aesthetics and technology, which I've been teaching for a long time now. And then I also went to Being and Time. So I think, like Heidegger incredibly has influenced 20th and 21st century intellectuals from Lacan, Arendt, Rancière, Badiou, people that won't, Foucault, people that won't acknowledge, Heidegger, but you find traces of Heidegger there, and I'm missing just a whole bunch. I'm just sort of thinking of the social theorists that we deal with that have been influenced by Heidegger. Virilio, for example, Marcuse, he was Marcuse's teacher, Karl Jaspers. And now, particularly in the 21st century, and particularly in like the last, I can almost say quarter of the first quarter of the 21st century, Heidegger's work on technology and aesthetics has sort of come to be the dominant work that gets taught. So his dates are 1889 to 1976. He's considered a continental philosopher, phenomenologist. I consider him a theorist. I myself and others consider him a theorist of technology and aesthetics. And I think perhaps where, for me, his most useful work is as a theorist of technology and aesthetics. Having said that, I have read Being and Time probably about 5 times now in various configurations and reading courses. And, he's a profound thinker. I think it could have been said, one of my PhD students is going to defense, where a lot of it's on Being and Time and existentialism. But I think he could have said it, I think he says, like Hegel in his Introduction to Aesthetics, I think Heidegger's sort of work comes through, the earlier work comes through, and also his later stuff that was recently published really comes through in the essays on aesthetics and the essays on technology. So having said that, I should have given you a younger picture of Heidegger. It's really interesting what people look like when they're young and when they look older. Maybe I'll put that in next week with the Marcuse, just so you see. So Heidegger, hi Karma, Heidegger posits, okay, so the question concerning technology was worked on in the 30s, 34, Then it became worked on again in the 50s. This is the sort of extended version that you're reading. There's another version, which is very interesting, in the Bremen lectures, where he equates mechanized agriculture to the gas chambers. So that's an earlier version of this. It was given as a talk. It's then worked into an essay. It was first published in 1950, and it was published in 1977, the English translation here. What he does is he posits two conflicting tendencies. And would you just mind checking, see if that's working?
Yeah.
Okay. Heidegger posits two conflicting tendencies in technology. He's going to repeat this again and again in various forms throughout the very dense but 35-page essay. The dominant tendency is of instrumental technology, which really he considers it's a tendency of the danger inherent in technology. By this he would mean mechanized agriculture, nuclear power, how we all become part of technology in a way. So that's a danger inherent. And he says that this has come to the fore, or I'm saying, that this has come to the fore as corporate techno-scientific and techno-war economies. And I'm borrowing on sort of Virilio's work there too. So that's the danger inherent in technology. That's the dominant tendency in the modern world for Heidegger. And remember, Heidegger's a theorist who laments the modern world. And so that will come through. And second, the tendency towards poiesis. And poiesis is the revealing and saving potential inherent in technology. It's techne as artistic. So there's two tendencies. One is the danger, the dominant tendency, and the second is the tendency towards poiesis, the revealing and saving potential that's inherent in technology. He's arguing that they're both there. That both tendencies are in technology. And he begins the essay, which I missed on the first few reads of it. I missed a really important beginning, which I actually picked up for the first time in a grad class I teach on accelerating technicity. So using Heidegger, but also using the accelerist theories. And he begins and he ends with something I think really important in terms of how to do political theory. And he says, what follows, we're going to be questioning concerning technology. But the reason we're doing this is because questioning builds a way. Questioning builds a way. And he advises us, he says we're advised to pay heed. We would be advised to pay heed to the way. And the way that it builds is a way of thinking. And he's going to build this to where he talks about critical reflection, which Zizek also picks up as critical reflection. So one of the sub-themes, of course, on second term, and was there in first term too, but is really like, and it's something I always come back to because I'm always trying to figure it out. It's like, okay, so Heidegger's got an essay called What is Called Thinking, that are collected into a book called What is Called Thinking. But it gets more interesting when you bring the digital technology and thinking together. So then it's like, what is thinking now? Because thinking now is different than thinking before computers, thinking the way Heidegger thought. So in that sense, and Kathleen Hales who works a lot on technology, has a new book out on sort of cognitive thinking with the technologies we're using, because we think differently. And certainly, I know you guys haven't, but if you've thought before using technology and the access to information that we have now, it was different thinking. I'm not saying it was better. I don't actually necessarily think it was better at all, but it was just a different way of thinking. So I'm not going to give the Gogh theory that it was a better way of thinking, and now that in fact, now we have access to so many resources. And we also have access to thinking. What I've noticed in myself is I can think more quickly. I can write more quickly. Because, as I'm sure you notice, I mean, this isn't Heidegger, it's me, but as I'm sure you notice, when you're writing on a computer, you and the machine kind of join together. I mean, that's what he's talking about in terms of the relation between humans and machines. When you're writing with a pen, it happens too, but if you write slow with a pen like me, it doesn't happen as immediately, right? So, in a sense, one of the things that happened to me when I moved from writing on typewriters to writing on computers, and that would have been in the 80s, I started thinking differently. And I mean, and over the years, what I've noticed is thinking quicker, access to lots of resources, writing quicker, and writing, without any writer's block. So I can just sit down and write. I mean, I edit because basically everything looks good on a screen. That's the trick, right? So you need to print out, etc., as I've told you before. But so there's a real sort of different way of thinking. And I think you end up thinking as more of a connected organism. Heidegger doesn't talk about that, but he's really asking us at the beginning of the essay to really question what's going on in technology. And it's a way of thinking. So he's offering a way of thinking. Now, let's go to slide 4. So there's Heidegger getting water from, Heidegger was always also hanging out in the Black Forest at his cottage, which, again, I did a project shooting sunrise and sunset in a cottage for 40 days and 40 nights in the Judean desert in response to this. But there's Heidegger, so he's hauling water, and this is going to recur again, because he also repeats himself, you might notice. So the essence of technology, he says, is by no means, the essence of technology is by no means anything technological. So I wanted to just kind of show an old technology there, because of course that's a technology. The well is a technology. And he says the essence of it is by no means anything technological. Now he talks about being. And he says, and he's talking about beings and being, okay? And being is, I was going to say, a quick definition of it is it's kind of like the there is, right? It's not beings, it's the there is of the particular time in history and also the ontological there is. So it comes into presence, so being in modern technology. First he says being comes into presence in enframing. And I'll talk about the difference between enframing and what it means. And he says the animating impulse of technology, modern technology is enframing. That this being, that there is that we're in, contains both a danger and a saving power. And the danger is connected with enframing as the mode of revealing in a mode of technology. And so the mode of revealing in a mode of technology, and I'm going to say modern technology because eventually he does. So the mode of enframing back in this technology is really not enframing in a way, right? And that's why the picture probably has so much currency, because there it is in nature. It's water being hand drawn from a spring by pumping it. I don't know, have you ever used these? When I grew up in rural Manitoba, and we used to haul water to our farm, right? I used to have to go and pump water, so it's pretty awesome. So you get a sense of the water. It's really interesting. Just thinking about it right now, you get a sense that the water is actually coming from the ground. Because you can see it coming from the ground. And so in that sense, this would not be what he would consider enframing. Rather, it would be human interaction with technology, more in the line of poiesis. And so when he talks about enframing, he really is talking about a mode of ordering. It's a way of revealing, bringing forth, challenging forth, and it's a mode of ordering for enframing. And I'm going to return to enframing and give a long definition a few times. Right? Hey, Andre. So technology then, for Heidegger, is both a means to an end, it's got a teleology, and it's a human activity, it's got an anthropology. So it's two things. It's a human activity, and it is a means to an end. And so if you take a look at some of our technologies now, and he would, in terms of technology, all this would be considered technology, obviously, right? So what I'm trying to also say there is so the apps, etc., are considered technology. You know, Google, Windows, computers, etc. It's a means to an end, and it's a human activity. And he says that humans have both a mastery of technology. You can see the influence of Marx here. There's been a debate over whether Heidegger read Marx's 1844 manuscripts, and I would definitely maintain that he did, certainly because he was working with Marcuse as a student. So humans have both a mastery, excuse me, a mastery of technology, and we are a condition of possibility for the development of technology. We have a mastery of it, and we are a condition of possibility for its development. That is, humans, in interaction with previous technologies, came up with all these devices. That it's human ingenuity that advances technology. And it's technology in interaction with human beings that gives rise to this ingenuity. So it's humans that bring forth in technology. Now, bringing forth, what he means by bringing forth, and he makes a distinction between bringing forth and challenging forth. Challenging forth is really what happens in framing, where humans are controlling and controlled by technology. It's what happens in instrumental technology. Bringing forth simply means to presence, to bring to presence, to bring out of concealment. So to bring forth in Greek is poiesis, and there should be a line up there if I was doing it totally correctly. An accent. So bringing forth in Greek language is called poiesis. And it doesn't, as he says, it doesn't just belong to the craft industry, it also belongs to art and poetry. It belongs also to the physical thing itself. Physis, the arising of something from out of itself. So it belongs to that. He's going to give you the four causes in a minute. So basically, the bringing forth also belongs to the thing itself, what comes out of itself. So what does bringing forth do? Well, and Heidegger will write a lot on this. But what it does, so this is kind of really key to his overall theory. It brings forth what was in, particularly also his aesthetic theory, but it brings forth what was in concealment out of concealment. So it brings forth what was hidden out of being hidden. It then unconceals. It reveals. And what it reveals is a truth. He talks about artists working on material and bringing forth a truth. And ones who bring forth new truths he considers artist philosophers. That's somebody who, even though we're stuck in a discourse where when we put our thoughts in it, it gets contained in it, so that would be in framing. Bringing forth something new is bringing forth a truth. And the Greek word for this revealing, bringing forth the truth is aletheia. That's revealing a truth. So this plays in his aesthetic theory, it plays in his work on technology, it plays very much in his more recently translated stuff in the last 5 to 10 years in a Reaganist or event. So really here, I mean, the terms that you kind of want to hang on to here are in framing, which I'm going to go to again, poiesis, aletheia, and unconcealed. Now, are you fairly clear how he's working with those? Because he's basically saying bringing forth wasn't always challenging forth, right? Bringing forth is bringing something out of the material you're working with. It's revealing. It belongs to the craft industry, but it also belongs to art and poetry. It belongs to the thing itself, the physical thing, the material of the thing. And it brings forth what wasn't there, or was there but not obvious. It unconceals, it brings forth a truth. And so in terms of revealing, aletheia it's revealing a truth. So he's drawing on Plato, slide 7, yeah. And he's saying, bringing forth in Greek is poiesis. He then, as I just said, says it belongs to all these different, it belongs to the craft industry, it belongs to poetry, it belongs to art, it belongs to the thing itself. Now he begins then with the silver chalice, which is a religious object. Okay? So he begins with the silver chalice to talk about the four causes. And he's defining the four causes different than Aristotle, and he says this, right? So, I mean, Heidegger is also quite influenced by Aristotle. So if you take a look at the four causes on this, and how you create this silver chalice. I mean, the first cause is the material cause materialis, which is the silver. The second cause is the cause of formulalis, which is the formal cause. It's the form it's going to take. So you've got the material, which is the silver. You've got the form it's going to take, which is this goblet. Then you've got the purpose, which is the final cause. So here he's taking a look at this silver chalice. He's saying it's a ceremony for the communion of Christian religion. And you've got the fourth, which he sees as being crucially important, and that's the efficient cause, causa efficiens, which is the silversmith. So it's a silversmith that's going to bring out, is going to reveal this chalice through working with the material cause, the formal cause, and the end cause. So, you know, if Kyle and I were both given the task of making the chalice, and the material we're supposed to use is silver, we'd have an idea of what a chalice is. So the material we're using is the material cause. The formal cause is like the form, like we know it's like a goblet of some kind. It doesn't necessarily have to have a stem on it, and we know the purpose. So then the efficient cause is the silversmith. Now, I don't know, have you guys made pottery? No? I'm trying to think if I have. I don't think I have. I've done, you have, Greg?
Yeah, I didn't when I was a kid, I used to make cups and stuff.
Cool, okay, so in terms of that, so that's great because the purpose or the telos is going to be like it's going to be used for something, right? And the material, what did you make it out of? Clay?
Yeah, clay.
Okay, because you're forming it on with or without a wheel, and the form then is going to be what you see as being a cup, and you're going to be the potter or the maker. You know, so the efficient cause is the maker basically. I was trying to think so I've made baskets. I did a basket workshop. They were hard. But the thing was, what I quickly noticed was my idea of what was going to be this basket made out of palm tree, like the palm tree leaf things. My idea of what I really learned, and it was interesting, and I'm not very good at crafts, it appears, but what I learned was interesting because, and particularly in relation to this, because, okay, so I had the palm leaves, the dried palm leaves, which was going to weave. The form was going to be a basket of some sort, and the idea was the basket's going to hold something. And so the weaver, myself, when you're working with material, and I learned this sort of very, very well, and I was working with a craftsperson, so who had revived this ancient art, okay? That was kind of cool. What happens is the material you've got there, the end product was not how I saw it was going to be. And that was kind of cool. So then it really sort of reminded me of what Heidegger is saying is, although, you know, here I'm the efficient cause doing it, all of these others come into play. And he's saying that they all come into play. He is, in this particular work, emphasizing more the role of the silversmith. A silversmith who's going to like bring it forward. So the four causes, the material cause, the formal cause, the shape or form, the end cause, the use, and the efficient cause that's going to bring about the effect, that's the silversmith. And in this one, the silversmith is dominant, but, you know, if you've ever worked with wood, for example, you'll know that, okay, you're making a table, it's also going to depend on what kind of wood you got, how it plays out. Like it's not just that you take it, unless you get into, you know, unless you get into mass production, and then they'll all look like something like this, right? Or if you get into IKEA tables, then, you know, that's kind of interesting because they're all prefabricated, and then you put them together, and so you've got the feeling of producing something. First time I put an IKEA table together, they gave me the wrong screws, and I screwed it into the floor. I had it down, I was screwing it, I actually had it screwed to the floor, and I was like upside down. And I'm like, wow, like, first time I was doing it, I was like, wow, this is really hard. How do regular people do this, right? And then I'm like, and I took it back, and they were like, yeah, my screw was that much too long, which I probably should have been able to tell if I had been a maker at all. They were like, you didn't notice? And I was like, no. So here he's got the four causes of making something, basically. Now, if you go back to the previous slide, so the silversmith is bringing forth, he's bringing forth a chalice, or she is bringing forth a chalice. Does anybody do jewelry or anything like that, like work with silver? No, so no, we don't have such big makers here. Is anybody a filmmaker? That works in my grad class, and aesthetics and politics, or the politics of aesthetics. We've got a few filmmakers. So he then says, well, okay, so what does bringing forth do? And he uses the four causes, and he says it brings forth what was concealed out of concealment. So he would say the chalice was concealed in the silver, that the person working with it unconceals and brings forth you know, the final product, which is a truth. It reveals, right? Now, where did I put my glasses? Okay. We did that. Techne. Let's talk about techne a bit. So Heidegger says that the essence of technology has everything to do with aletheia, revealing the truth. And he says that technology brings forth, it's a way of revealing. And then he provides the Greek etymology of technology. One of the things that Heidegger does, and if you get a chance, study with Jay Golding, because Jay is absolutely rigorous on the etymology of every one of the words. So, what Heidegger gives you some of the etymology. He provides the Greek etymology of technology, which is technikon, that which belongs to techne. And techne belongs to bringing forth, revealing. It's a poiesis. And it also refers to the activities and names of craftsmen and women, and the mind, and fine arts. So techne is a form of bringing forth. It's a bringing forth, so it's a poiesis. It refers to activities and it refers to activities and the craftspeople and the mind and fine arts. What he then says is technology, so you've got techne as a mode of revealing, of bringing forth. The etymology of that is technikon. Technology is a mode of revealing, and it comes to presence the realm, and sentences, because they're translated from German, so I checked this and I didn't miss a word, it's on 13. Technology comes to presence the realm where revealing and unconcealment take place, where aletheia, truth, happens. So he's saying that the technology itself is a mode of revealing. Techne is a mode of revealing, it's a bringing forth. Technology, then he says, is a mode of revealing, which can be either a bringing forth or a challenging forth. It comes to presence, or it brings to presence the realm where revealing and unconcealment take place, where aletheia, truth, happens. Which allows him then, so we set out techne, technology, it allows him then to get to modern technology. And he says, modern technology is also a mode of revealing. But the revealing that holds sway in modern technology doesn't bring forth in the manner of poiesis. In modern technology, the type of revealing is a challenging. It sets upon and challenges forth. So if you take a look at the peasant, I think it's in England, if you take a look at the sort of image of the peasants out working the land, and if you also take a look at like Megabuck's agriculture, mechanized agriculture, which is incredible how much those machines cost. I don't know if anybody's got any connection with the farm, but if you talk to anybody who farms, it's almost like they had to move to corporate farming because the machines cost about $800,000 and up, right? So what you see is the difference of like crops, right? So modern technology is a way of revealing. It doesn't bring forth in the manner of poiesis, which would be the first picture of the peasants working the land. No, I mean that's hard work, obviously. In modern technology, what you get is a challenging forth. It's like a domination of the land. And the peasant, Heidegger says, doesn't challenge the soil, is on 15, but agriculture as a mechanized food industry does. And of course, when you get into agriculture as a mechanized food industry, you also get into a lot of, what do you call it? GMO, I was going to say a lot of genetically modified foods. You get into like, there's been this, I mean, agriculture is a really good example of this. And at this moment, I wish I knew more about it, but partly it's not just the change in technology of working the land, it's also the change in technology of what's grown as crops and how the yield is increased using a lot of chemicals that then become really bad for people's health, right? So then you make a distinction now between sort of organic produce and non-organic produce. And so if you can actually, I mean, it's really quite amazing. You can taste the difference. There's a trick with the non-organic, and that is if you soak them in, I do this all the time if it's not organic. I do it with organic too. But if you soak them in baking soda and water, it takes off the sort of chemicals. Because I mean, particularly blueberries, there's a real sort of chemical component to it, which is part of the whole technology and production, right? So, in a way, I mean, look, Heidegger, even in his time, because he died in 79, would argue that you can no longer sort of farm that way. And yet, what happens with agriculture, the mechanized food industry, is that it is a corporation now. So I mean, you also get, if you talk to people that are doing work on studying farming in Canada, and we interviewed a candidate last year that was doing that for a sociology position. One of the things that happens is the small farmer, so you know, the independent private farmer who has maybe a 3/4 section or something like that, would work the land himself or herself. And they would be in tune with the seasons. They would also, my dad farmed, so also, you know, one of the fields would be fallow. They would rotate it. They would actually relate and take care of the land. And they would get very upset when the neighbors started using like excess, like liquid fertilizer rather than sort of bringing it in and destroying the land and making it more productive. So what the person was saying is that the private farmer can't keep up, obviously, with corporate farming. So basically what you've got is anybody who's an independent farmer, unless you're really wealthy, is really in debt. That it's virtually impossible now. So the technology, in a sense, has, and I mean, I'm not, what Heidegger's saying is the technology has changed how we farm. It's changed the produce we eat, or what I'm saying, taking off from him. And it's also changed, I would say, the composition of the class structure very much, in terms of, what he's considering peasants, what we would consider independent commodity producers, right? I would say. So slide that is. We'll see what the next slide is. Okay. Then he talks about uranium. He goes on to talk about, that uranium is set upon, that's challenged upon, set upon to yield atomic energy. While the hydroelectric plant is set into the current of the Rhine, and it sets the Rhine to supplying its hydraulic pressure, which then sets the turbines turning. So it takes away, and then he uses one of Holden's poems on the Rhine, with the way the Rhine used to be, which was part of humans' interaction with the river. So if you go to page 16 on the hydroelectric plant, and he goes down, he talks about the Rhine. He says, the hydroelectric plant is not built into the Rhine River, as was the old wooden bridge that joined bank with bank for hundreds of years. Rather, the river is dammed up into the power plant. So now the river ceases to be a river, and it's basically a water power supplier. He says, what the river is now is a water power supplier. And then he goes on to say the Rhine, as dammed up into the power works, there's a difference between that and the Rhine that Holderlin writes about. Okay, so I'm not going to read from the poem, Holderlin's poem. I'm not a big fan of Holderlin, but Heidegger is. What the poem talks about is the Rhine as a river and the character of the river and interacting with the river and people getting water from the river for their daily sustenance, and also to feed the crops and that kind of stuff and their animals. And the beauty of it. Which then allows him to talk about stockpiling. Now, he talks about stockpiling in the standing reserve. And the first example he uses is coal. Which is kind of an interesting example because coal's not that prevalent really anymore because it's such a, it's quite a dirty energy. But if you take a look here at the stockpiling of coal, in these two different instances, which are contemporary, what you find, and what he says, is that coal is taken out of the mining area. It's not, but it's taken out of the mining area, but it's not taken out of the mining area for use, or that it may be present someplace else. It's stockpiled, it's on call. It's waiting for use. It's stockpiled, it's on call, and then he goes back and he talks about the hydroelectric plant again. And he talks about how the hydroelectric plant is basically, it dams up the Rhine, it changes the flow of the Rhine, it changes the habitat of the animals in the Rhine. And it makes these all subordinate to the damming up for electrical power to run turbines. Now, I figured what I would maybe do with this is this sort of covers the move from stockpiling to standing reserve. And I'll give you a hint here if you haven't read it. We're all part of the standing reserve, all right? But the sort of move from stockpiling to standing reserve, which is on pages 16 to 17, he talks about revealing as a challenging force. That is, revealing as in framing. So once you hit modern technology, what you're going to see as a dominant type of technology, what Marcuse is going to call instrumental technology, you're going to see that the type of revealing that runs modern technology is what does what Heidegger calls sets upon. It sets upon, it challenges forth. So he's talking about revealing as challenging forth. And by this he means that the energy concealed in nature is unlocked. What is unlocked is transformed. What is transformed then gets stored up. And what's stored up is distributed. And what is distributed switches about ever anew. It switches into something else. So coal is mined, stockpiled, distributed, and then it turns into fuel. So he talks about unlocking, transforming, storing, distributing, and switching from one form to another. He says all of these are ways of revealing. How they're done, all of these are ways of revealing. But this revealing never comes to an end. What it reveals is a particular way of interacting with one's environment. And that particular way of interacting with the environment is regulating and securing. That is ordering. So if you do any of the Frankfurt School, you'll come across the term instrumental rationality. You'll also come across instrumental technology, for example, where everything, everywhere is ordered to stand by and to be immediately at hand. So he's going back to his earlier work there. Be immediately present at hand to be used. And he calls this the standing reserve. So what the revealing reveals is the idea that we're regulating everything, that we're controlling everything, that we are securing everything, that we're ordering everything, for the purpose, Heidegger says, for it to stand by, to be immediately at hand. And then he gives a really good example. He calls this the standing reserve. Then he gives a really good example of the airplane. So and the example he gives is, obviously you've flown somewhere. The example he gives is waiting on the tarmac just before taking off. So you can feel the power of the plane, the standing reserve of that energy just before taking off. So he gives that as an example of sort of a standing reserve of the energy that's going to fly the plane. And then he talks about the forester. He talks about the forester, and this is on page, I think it's 18, yeah. And he gives you images of the forester, and he also gives you images of mechanized forestry. So the real sort of difference between the forester who's out there working, cutting down trees, and mechanized forestry, where it's being done by machines. So he says the forester, who in the wood measures the felled timber and to all appearances walks the same forest path in the same way as his grandfather did, is today commanded by profit-making in the lumber industry, whether he knows it or not. He's made subordinate to the orderability of cellulose, which for its part is challenged forth by the need for paper, which is then delivered to newspapers and illustrated magazines. The latter, in their set, what they do, they set forth and configure public opinion that becomes available on demand. So the newspapers also, so he kind of traces that through. He says the latter, in their turn, set public opinion to accepting what's printed so that a configuration of opinion becomes available on demand. So what he's doing is tracing the instrumental rationality from its very beginning through to the end, right? So the challenging forth, the setting forth. So he's building up to say, it's not just something that's contained in technology, it's what runs our world. It's what structures the world. Now Heidegger spent a lot of time walking in the forest. So he's going to use it, he's going to use examples, he uses nature examples. When he talks about standing reserve, he talks about, in German it's Bestand, that's the stockpile, the stocking, the standing reserve. It's elements that can be used and are kept on hand to be used. It's the instrumental idea of extracting more and more and more. If you take a look at it in terms of, Heidegger didn't, but if you take it look at it in terms of neocolonialism and the pulling out of natural resources and stockpiling them, that's a standing reserve. Ranfate, yeah.
I was wondering, are objects in nature that haven't been stored up yet considered standing reserve?
I don't know. Probably not. So objects in nature that haven't been used yet, are they lined up to be used? Like, okay, so my cousins are foresters, right, in northern BC, and they're like real cowboys, so they seem to really enjoy this. So they also obviously have to do the foresting, like the planting. So if the trees are planted to be harvested, you could say they're a standing reserve. Okay, because that's, to go back to the four posits, right? So that's the material that's going to go. If it's a tree out there, and he's got something good on a tree in there too, but in terms of poesis, but if it's a tree and it's not lined up for a final cause, right, then probably not. But he would say humans are standing reserve. Like we've constructed ourselves as standing reserves. Yeah, Rafate.
So like an oil reserve that you know is there and you maybe have plans in the future, would it be standing reserve?
Yes, I would say yes. And the oil is really tricky, right? Because what you get into is even, I don't know if you follow fracking or not, right? So, okay, so what you get into is you used to drill down, drill it out, and fill up the oil well. Now what you do, which is kind of insidious, but you can make a lot of money fast, which is why they're doing it, and pull out fast, is you pull it just below the surface. So you throw in high pressured water, which completely erodes the soil. And then in doing that, you can pull out the oil. The oil companies don't call it fracking when you talk to them. They go to details to explain the process to you, right? Because it's really harmful. So yeah, if you know, if the land's been surveyed, and if you have in the land titles office, if the mines and minerals are put on the back of the title deed and it's been surveyed, then for sure it's a standing reserve. It's just waiting to be pulled out. If it hasn't been surveyed and nobody knows it's there, obviously it's not a standing reserve. And then there's countries who have a lot of oil but they're sitting on it. So in the sense, they know it's there, it's a standing reserve, but it hasn't been mined yet. That's a really good question, actually. Aisha, did you have a question or just your hand? So yeah, I'm trying to think of other objects. Oil's a good example. I mean, oil's probably the best example. Wood. Then you get into technology, okay? So I was just thinking, okay, so if you know technological capabilities, but companies sit on it, it's kind of there as a standing reserve, right? That's combined with like technology that is possibly available plus the mind of working it out. And I was thinking of the self-driving car, which was apparently quite invented about 20 years ago or more, right? But it doesn't seem to be going so well anyway, so maybe it's good. So back to these pictures, because I thought, so again to stress that we are the orderers of the standing reserve, and in ordering the standing reserve of the world. So, I mean, Ranafate's question is really good because that kind of means, to go back to Marx, most of nature could potentially be a standing reserve, okay? And we're the orderers of this. And in ordering the standing reserve, we're also ordering ourselves, according to the principle of challenging forth, according to the principle of inframing. Which then gets to a pretty good definition that he provides of inframing. And before I get to that, I just want to back up to this slide once more to stress that humans are the orderers of the standing reserve, that we ourselves are standing reserve. Now this is where he makes what I would call a leap in the text. We order the standing reserve and we're also part of it. We're part of the standing reserve. We pose as, owners, lords, masters of the earth, but the animating impulse of technology and framing orders humans. What he says then is that human order, in a sense, the real as standing reserve. So they order not Lacan's real, but they order the real around them as standing reserve, according to the way technology shows itself. So he's saying there basically we order what's around us as standing reserve. We order being as standing reserve according to the technology that's available, the technology that shows itself to us. And what shows itself to us in modern technology is in framing. That is technology that challenges forth. So Gestalt, and he uses Gestalt there, is basically the frame, the apparatus, the skeleton, which is where in framing comes from. And in framing is the human orientation toward technology that exists in modern society. It's the essence of technology. On 20, he defines it as the gathering together of that setting upon, that's challenging forth, which sets upon man, challenging him forth to reveal the real. It's not the Lacanian real. In the mode of ordering as standing reserve. So he's basically saying that we gather together, we address that around us, both humans and nature. So you can see sort of an influence of Marx. To reveal a standing reserve, to reveal the world as a standing reserve. And in framing, page 20, is the way of revealing which holds sway in the essence of modern technology. Now there's a rule of inframing. And that is that it demands that nature be orderable as standing reserve. That we don't just interact with nature, that we don't just take from it what we need. And you can see that he's hearkening back to a previous interaction with nature, right? But the rule of inframing is that nature be ordered as a standing reserve. And in ordering nature as a standing reserve, we order ourselves as a standing reserve. And then, just to put this, sort of pull it together, he changes it a little bit. So Heidegger will repeat himself, but he'll change it slightly. So he says, in framing is the gathering together that belongs to the setting upon, which sets upon man, and, this is a new part, puts him in position. And that position is in the position of inframing. And inframes him, puts him in position to reveal the real, in a mode of ordering as standing reserve. And then he says, as one who's challenged forth in this way, the humans, the human stands with the essential realm of inframing. That if we're relating, and it's Marx's basic idea, right? Although Heidegger wouldn't say that, but if we're relating to the world in terms of challenging forth, that we are also going to be part of that. So if we're relating to nature in form of dominating nature, is what Marx would say. If we're relating to nature in terms of how to dominate it, that we ourselves are going to be dominated. And we're going to be dominated by what he calls the frame, by what he calls Gestalt, the frame, apparatus, and skeleton that we've created. That we've created and then gone to a human orientation. It's part of our human orientation towards technology. It becomes the essence of technology. Oh, we read that, sorry. Okay. And then I thought we could have a picture of Heidegger thinking. There's a lot of pictures of Heidegger thinking. So, partly there's a contradiction. Because on the one hand, we're considered the masters of technology. And on the other hand, human beings are a condition of possibility for developing it. So there's a contradiction there, because in developing technology, to go back to Marx, we're developing ourselves. And if we're developing technology in a particular way, we're developing ourselves in a particular way. So to make a distinction between in framing as challenging forth, he then says it's an ordering of destiny. Whereas poiesis, bringing forth, is also a destiny, but it's a different kind of destiny. That this challenging forth is an ordering of our world that determines the destiny of it. It's a destining of it. Now remember, and I want to do, there's a younger Heidegger. I got a picture of him younger still. The question concerning technology is the question concerning the constellation in which revealing and concealing, in which the coming to presence of truth comes to pass. And it can come to pass either as framing or poiesis, either as challenging forth or bringing forth. But in modern technology, the dominant form is challenging forth. That's where he's going with that. Now, in framing is nothing technological. He says it's nothing on the order of the machine. It's the way, to go back to the very beginning, to question the way, it's the way in which the real reveals itself as a standing reserve. It's the way in which being, the world, culture, reveals itself as a standing reserve. The human is within. And the human stands with the realm of inframing and is challenged forth. The human, the destiny of modernity is the humans, that we humans are in the condition of inframing. That's the only way we use technology. And we use it to challenge forth and dominate, would be Heidegger's argument. So what do we have? We have inframing as a particular mode of revealing truth, or aletheia. And it's a particular mode, it's not poiesis, it's a particular mode of revealing truth or aletheia, which challenges forth. And in challenging forth, what we've created regulates us, humans, to the kind of revealing that is ordering. So what we've created also regulates us, would be a quick way of saying that. And what this inframing is a mode of revealing. It's a mode of revealing truth that's premised on the principle of challenging forth. It's going to regulate humans to the kind of revealing that is simply ordering and domination. What's concealed then is a type of revealing which is poiesis, which lets presence come forth into appearance, which you may find in art. Okay? So again, back to the well, the more original revealing is what is poiesis, a bringing forth, which lets presence come forth into appearance rather than challenging it forth. And that's on page 27. He warns, and this sort of his warning, that the threat of technology is deeper than the machines, the lethal machines. So he's talked about like coal mining, he's talked about, and stockpiling, he's talked about uranium being stockpiled into atomic bombs. He's talked about the damming of the Rhine, right? And he says the threat of technology is deeper than the lethal machines and apparatuses of technology. The real danger for Heidegger is that humans don't have the possibility to enter into a more original revealing, which would be that of poiesis, and enter and get to a more primal truth than that of inframing. So the more original revealing is poiesis, and that's technology's saving power. So remember we started out by saying that technology had both a destroying dangerous power and a saving power. That the more original is poiesis, the bringing forth, and that's technology's saving power. He says on page 32, so long as we represent technology as an instrument rather than in relation with, I would add, we remain held fast in its will to master. And if we're in its will to master, then we ourselves are going to be mastered. But there's no way out. Which is why he proposes, at the beginning, he says we have to find a way. We have to find a way in thinking. That is somehow, that technology won't simply be an instrument. But it's going to be more than an instrument. It can be something we can use, but that we have a different relation to it. So the question concerning technology is the question then is concerning, and this was on, there was a reminder right before. So that was there with the quote from Heidegger. The question concerning technology is the question concerning the constellation in which revealing and concealing, in which the coming to presence of truth comes to pass. Okay, now that doesn't mean that much. It does when he gets further down. Human activity can't really, Heidegger says, directly counter the danger of technology. And human achievement can't banish it. But human reflection can. Thinking can. Critical reflection can. So he ends up, interestingly, where Zizek kind of ends up, which is a form of critical thinking. Human reflection. It's on page 33. And he says, it's the last paragraph in 33, and it's basically on the board, so I'm not going to, or on the slide, so I'm not going to redo it. Oh, I will, because it's slightly different. The coming to presence of technology threatens revealing, threatens it with the possibility that all revealing will be consumed in ordering, and that everything will present itself only in the unconcealedness of a standing reserve. Then he says, human activity can't directly counter this danger. Human achievement can't banish it. But human reflection can ponder the fact that all saving power must be of a higher essence than that which is endangered that which is endangered, top of 34, though at the same time kindred to it. So critical reflection, and you think, okay, so how do you do critical reflection? Well, Heidegger gives a hint how, maybe. He returns to this quote where he says, the essence of technology is nothing technological. And now it takes on an important point. The essence of technology is nothing technological. That essential reflection upon technology and confrontation with it has to happen in a realm that is akin to the essence of technology, but also fundamentally different from it. So coming out of, he's there, and then he says, well, such a realm is art. Which then he's gathered up, because he talks about gathering, so he's gathered up what he said previously, which poetically humans dwell upon this earth, that's poiesis, and questioning is the piety of thought. So he's gathered that up into this realm where one can question, which is a realm of art, and he probably would include philosophy and art there. So it has to be akin to the essence of technology, but it also has to be fundamentally different from it. Well, how is art fundamentally different? The art he's thinking of is not according to inframing. It's not according to an instrumental impulse. Rather, it's a bringing forth, not a challenging forth. So you get to say, well, what's art for Heidegger? And there's Van Gogh's famous peasant shoes. It's one of the overused images of the 20th and 21st century when talking about Heidegger, because he uses it. So art for Heidegger, and here you have to go outside of the text and take a look at his work on art, which I think matches up nicely with this. For art, for Heidegger, art's the highest form of techne. It's a distinctive way of bringing forth, And it's a distinctive way of unrevealing truth. It's a distinctive way in which truth comes into being, in which truth becomes historical. And he says in art, what is brought forth, so remember it's bringing forth, not challenging forth. In art, which is brought forth is something new. Something we haven't seen before. Something that's put together differently. And often a lot of new technologies occur in art, especially in sort of biotechnology and digital technology. They'll occur in art and then they'll get taken over into the corporate, right? So, which is why something like Apple has such a large design department. So then, so poiesis is an art of technology that gets expressed in language, in poetry, in the visual arts, in aesthetic arts of new media, which is also digital dirt aesthetic new media arts. And Heidegger, of course, identifies language, poetry, and the visual arts. Somebody like Arthur Croker talks about the sort of new media art and digital dirt art and speed writing that are forms of poiesis in contemporary times. Now, the art that Heidegger had in mind is Van Gogh's Peasant Shoes and Holderlin's poetry. So, if you examine Heidegger's reasons for selecting Van Gogh's Peasant Shoes, it's because he says, the shoes reveal the whole world of life of a rural peasant woman. Now, okay, we're going to look at the shoes and look at it. Really? And especially on a digital reproduction of it, right? The shoes reveal the whole world of life of a peasant woman. The worn shoes reveal the labor and joy of the woman's life, because he's a phenomenologist. They reveal her anxiety and show how she belongs to the earth. And then he argues that Holderlin's poetry reveals the truth to the German people of their historical situation in the 18th century. And of course, it's Holderlin's poetry that Heidegger uses to set out the two tendencies that we started with in technology, the tendency of danger and the tendency of saving grace. So he's using technology, or he's using Holderlin's work on the Rhine, poem on the Rhine to say that. And if you go to page 34, he says the same poet from which we heard the previous words says, but where there is danger, a saving power also grows. So he's taken Holderlin and his work on the Rhine, and he's applied it to technology, saying there's a danger and a saving power. And that's on page 34. So Heidegger positions art, and this is one of the reasons I like him, is he positions art as a setting into work of truth. And this is in the origin of the work of art. It's in Heidegger's basic writings. So he positions, which is not on the class, but which is on my aesthetics and politics class. He positions art as a setting into work of truth. The artist as one who's able to bring forth in being, in the there is, something that doesn't yet exist. And artwork as that which unconceals or opens up in its own way the being of beings, the ontological and historical being of beings. Now if we go back to the four causes. There, okay. So in a sense, for Heidegger, the artist engages in these four causes. And the efficient cause, the artist in this diagram, the silversmith, it brings something forth that hasn't been there before, something new. Unless, of course, he's following or she's following a formula. And then they're just bringing forth what's been there before, the formula they've worked out. He says that artists and artwork, so artwork that unconceals or opens up. I'm going to back up a second. The artist who's able to bring forth in being something that does not exist, and artwork that which unconceals or opens up in its own way the being of beings, brings out a new truth. And artists that do this are artist philosophers. So art then that's concerned with representing simple beauty or sensation or spectacle is really not an art that is the highest form of technique, nor is an essence of technology, but rather art that is done with the purpose of revealing something new. Heidegger says the artists that do this address the grounding question of philosophy, which is what is being. So in the poiesis, in the saving power of technology, Heidegger would argue that it allows you to then address a grounding question in philosophy, which is what is being. And then you can take a look at being as the there is ontologically, and then you can take a look at ontic being, which is the historical manifestation of that. Okay, we got a couple of minutes. Do you want me to backtrack on sort of anything here, or any questions or comments? Yeah, Kyle.
Did Heidegger ever write about or give his opinion on contemporary European art movements like surrealism or Dada?
No, not that I've read. I mean, it's so weird because it's really, do people hear the question? It's like, did Heidegger talk about Dadaism or surrealism? Heidegger, I mean, there's many problems with Heidegger. One of the problems is he's really stuck in the 18th century. Okay? And again, because he's stuck in the 18th century, and it's only, it's only towards the end in the, I think it's like 34, the first, maybe it's later. No, it was actually later he could compare mechanized agriculture to gas chambers. So he could basically see that the technology, the danger in technology basically leads to the eradication of human beings. But he couldn't seem to see that artwork past the 18th century. Like, I haven't seen him write anything on surrealists who, again, are bringing forth something totally new, and new in the way of seeing, right? A new truth, and Dadaism too is bringing forth a new truth, right? So I would say, I use Heidegger to look at contemporary artists. I've applied Heidegger to Stellark's work on technology, and robotics, and also his work hanging from hooks, right? Because he's a suspension artist as well. So I've used it, but Heidegger himself wouldn't have gone there. It's a very good question. Yeah, Jack?
I struggle.
Oh, okay, no problem. I thought you had your hand up. I thought you had sort of lazily had your hand up, right? It's always hard to tell. Anything else? Are we clear? Yeah, Don Hoon.
Like similar to this question, but then like artwork created by like 3D paintings or those kind of stuff, is that like part of framing or police?
That is also a good question. It gets really complicated when you get into digital art, right? So it's a really good question because you're saying artwork created by 3D modeling?
Model, yeah.
I would say that could be poiesis, unless you're applying, because once you've developed 3D modeling, and then I'll give you an example that I saw last night. A student was showing me her film from Aesthetics and Politics, and she's a she's working in digital media. But yeah, so that you could be using, it's a great question because you could be using the technology that's a technology developed according to challenging forth and the principles of inframing, but you could be using it in a way of poiesis, as a saving grace, a poetic way, right? So one of the students in Aesthetics and Politics was showing me, because she works in digital media, was showing me her film, and she had done, it's all done by code, right? So, and she had done sort of coming together as community, creation of something new which would get bigger and then it would explode, and she put all the code in. So although and she had to write her own code, but then of course they have a manual for how to write code. It's really beautiful. I'm not doing it justice, but it was awesome to watch, right? You're like, oh, that's really cool. So they have a manual for different, like not so much for the code, but different things you can do, and then you put it together. So in a sense, that would be an overlap maybe of inframing, because you're using this techno language and techno code to create something that it was not necessarily intended for. So then when you get into, there's a whole bunch of stuff done, like in sort of quick or aesthetic or digital dirt art, right? Like quick stuff like GIFs, like all of that just happens, that takes something and with an artistic twist, poiesis, they change the meaning. So that could also be poiesis, and using what was there as in framing. And it gets tricky also because when you take a look at something like, you know, I think Apple, I used to know one of their aesthetic directors, but they took Heidegger seriously, so they attempted to combine both in framing and poiesis, right, in the product. Yeah, come.
Did Heidegger ever make a distinction between art in itself and commodified art?
Not in those words, but he does make a distinction. I think I had the quote there. He does make a distinction between art that simply represents beauty and that kind of stuff, and art that is producing something new and revealing a new truth. So he would see commodified art as not revealing a new truth. That's also, because commodified art is just sort of really part of the whole and framing bag, right? And I was just going to see what he said about that, because he's really not interested in art that's just sort of representation or a setup to like paint beauty, okay? Or so commodified art would then be art that's going to be hung up in, you know, expensive buildings, that kind of stuff. And then you can also ask, what about photography or filmmaking? Because you can get into using a technology that is there as in terms of in framing, but you're using it in a different way. So you can kind of go through all that too. Anybody else before we go for break? Yeah, Tom.
In the early sections of the essay, it talks about how presencing is occasioning and occasioning is bringing forth. I'm just wondering if there's a meaningful distinction between those terms that aren't really coming through the text.
You know what? So that's good because so he goes, he's really trying to make a distinction there between presencing, occasioning, bringing forth as that which is poiesis, right? It's a bringing forth, as opposed to the gestalt, and gestalt in framing, which is that which is contained in a frame. So he's building there to presencing, bringing forth. He's kind of using them, I would say, in terms of the rest of his work, he's using them fairly similarly. So like bringing forth is a presence, right? And the occasioning, I've always had trouble with that because I'm like, well, why? I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be there, but it works. But yeah, that's a good question. Anything on aletheia or poiesis or what else do we have? Bless you. Okay. And again, you know, there's many, just before we go, I mean, for break, there's many things in that essay, right? Like and so if you're familiar with like Heidegger, you can see how, as a later piece, 1950, you can see how he's kind of thought and drawn it together. So when he says critical reflection, for people that have read What is Thinking, you know, what's called thinking, and then you kind of go back to that and you go, okay, well, what does he mean by thinking? Well, thinking is a way that's not contained in framing, okay? But you have to be able to, but he never fully sets it out, right? And he also points out in What is Called Thinking and elsewhere that we always end up thinking in the language that we're in, so it's hard to get a critical reflection on that. You know? And then the whole irony of it is, if you're talking about critical reflection, you know, he did not have, although maybe he did, but with his writings that have been released recently, in terms of his writings on you know, Jews, he didn't really have a critical reflection on what was going on with the German Nazi Party. You know, I mean, you know, the argument is he joined it to become a rector, but there was more than that. There's shots of him walking around the Black Forest with graduate students in SS gear and stuff, right? So he embraced it. And you're like, well, that's not a good model for critical reflection. So then you have to kind of ask yourself, well, you know, what is it I'm embracing that is not obvious to me, but is going to be like horrifying? And probably a lot. But I would say nothing as much as, you know, embracing the Nazi Party, the Nazi philosophy of Vogue and stuff. So his critical reflection, I don't think he was able to. I don't think he was able to do it fully. And again, then you get into the question, which is always a question, which is, okay, if somebody could live up to their own theory. So people have spent quite a bit of time looking at Being in Time and saying, oh yes, he did live up to his own theory. In fact, there's a real sort of nationalism and racism embedded in the text. Or ethnocentrism, not racism, German ethnocentrism. And other people argue there isn't, okay? But the thing is, if a thinker doesn't live up to his own theory, does that invalidate the theory? And I don't know. I mean, that would be a good question to think about. Or how does it invalidate it? Or, you know, there's different ways of going around that too. I think you have to take it into account. I think you have to, you know, I would be amiss if I was lecturing on Heidegger and I didn't point out that he had been a member of the Nazi Party, that he was less active after 34, but that could be a nice spin on what you read, and that he never disjoined or left it. So yeah. Okay, let's do a break. I don't know what time it is, but let me check. And we have 4 people presenting. If you could just put your hands up who are presenting so I know you're here. Ranfate, Jack, and the other 2 people. Sarah? Okay, and there's 1 person I'm not finding. So we'll assume there's 4, and I believe it is 12:58. So we'll be back at 1/4 after. Oh, and I should turn that off.